Hello. So it is March 26th, I believe, and this is actually my first post of 2025. I have had a really rough start to this year. Late in January, I lost my beloved cat Marky, and I have been devastated, and it's just been really hard to get any momentum to create any content for this channel. So but I'm back, and I've had some time to grieve, and I'm gonna try not to cry. So a couple weeks ago, I finally got the courage to get out of the house, stop moping around, and I had recently acquired the Viltrox 25mm F1.7. Recently on the market. I think it's been out maybe a month now, maybe a little longer. I thought that this would be a good, knock around lens when I didn't want to carry anything heavy. I already own the Viltrox 27mm F1.2, and if you've watched any of my other videos, you know it's probably my favorite lens. However, it's really big and heavy. And if I'm going out, say, taking my telephoto lens, if I think I'm going to be going somewhere where there might be some wildlife to photograph, I usually don't want to take that lens with me as well, but I'd like to have some type of standard lens to bring with me. So I was looking at this lens as a possibility for, covering that wide focal length without being too heavy, and it's really light, so that's really good. I should say that this is for APS-C, so it won't fit on a full frame camera unless you have a camera that can shoot in crop mode. Anyways, I got on the train and headed south to downtown San Diego, and before I knew it, I ended up at the Embarcadero and was buying a ticket to get on the Maritime Museum, which is, if you've never heard of that, it is a fleet of vintage ships. I think there's about 6 or 7, maybe 8 ships, and you can actually walk around onto the decks and below deck. It's really cool, and this was the first time I'd ever done that, which, when you live in a city, sometimes you forget to be a tourist in your own city. So you take some of these touristy spots for granted, but I was really pleasantly surprised. So in this video, I'd like to share with you some of the photos I took, and then some photos I took afterwards, and maybe just talk about the lens a little bit. In the end, I should say right now, I've decided I'm not going to keep this lens because I also own the Sony 20mm F1.8. And I like that lens a little better, and I'll discuss that later. It's definitely a bit wider than my 27mm, but it has some perks that this lens, I think, fails at. Or maybe not fails, but isn't as good at. All right, let's talk about it. First off, let's talk about the focal length of 25mm on a crop sensor camera. This equates to a field of view of 37.5mm on a full frame lens, which is super close to the very popular 35mm focal length. It is very versatile, giving a very natural perspective. It's useful for street or documentary photography, but also environmental portraits. I was impressed with the image quality of this lens, both in sharpness and color. The f1.7 max aperture does allow for some subject separation, but the less than stellar minimum focus distance is the weak point in my opinion. It's not terrible, it's just rather average and makes it trickier to get good foreground to background separation, aka smooth, non-distracting bokeh or 3D pop. It's not a deal breaker necessarily, it just means you really need to consider how to compose your shot if you want to blow out the background, as busier backgrounds may still render distracting. All in all, if you are looking for a fast prime lens in a standard focal length and are on a budget, then I can definitely recommend this lens, as long as you're okay with the underwhelming close-up capabilities. I had a lot of fun wandering around all these ancient ships, and while there were times I wish I had a wider lens inside some of the tight quarters, the 25mm was still a great focal length to capture a variety of shooting scenarios, from wide perspectives of the ship's exteriors to close-up details. On board the Berkeley, a beautiful Victorian ferry boat, I ventured deep into the ship's bowels. The boiler room was like a maze and dimly lit, but this lens with the f1.7 aperture did a great job of documenting those interiors. This lens is a really good choice for someone on a budget and who's looking for this standard prime lens. I would say if you are like me and you like having the ability to get a little closer to your subject, then the Sigma 23mm F1.4 might be a better choice. Or if you want to go wider and you have even more of a budget and can find this used like I did on eBay, the Sony 20mm F1.8 is also a good choice. Quite a bit wider though, so it's almost like not a comparison, not a fair comparison. But because I already have it in my kit, owning this would just be a little redundant, so that's why I'm returning it. I hope to maybe showcase this lens in another video in the future, but I really enjoy how close you can get with this lens. It's really cool. And because in the future I hope to get a full frame camera, I will also have a lens that I can use. I'm also excited that I'm finally back on YouTube making videos. I have some adventures planned in the future, so I hope you will come along with me. I have some bicycle adventures planned and maybe a trip to Santa Barbara in the near future. So if you're not subscribed, I hope you would consider subscribing, or at the very least liking if you found this video helpful. And thank you so much for joining me today.